Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in tonight's episode of The Traverse, Rights and Democracy Institute's monthly conversation series, where we explore the ideas and issues that make up our movement as we talk with the people who are putting them into action. My name is Dan Fingus. I'm the Vermont Organizing Director for Rights and Democracy. Last month, July 24th, marked the 11th anniversary of the $7.25 an hour federal minimum wage. It has not changed since 2009. The pandemic has put the issue of poverty wages at the forefront of the public discussion, as we saw that the most necessary workers, those assuming daily risk to go to work, are not paid enough to afford rent for a two-bedroom apartment in any state in the country. Now, as many states tentatively begin to reopen, many businesses are complaining about quote-unquote labor shortage. Today, we are looking at the ongoing struggle for a living wage and a livable wage, how we got here, and what the forecast is as we look ahead, both in our home states of Vermont, New Hampshire, and across the country. And today, we are very lucky to be joined by three amazing panelists, Saru Jayaraman, Annelise Orleck, and Maria Perez. So let me tell you a little bit about our three panelists before we get started. Saru is the president of the One Fair Wage campaign and director of the Food Labor Research Center at University of California, Berkeley. After 9/11, together with displaced World Trade Center workers, she co-founded the Restaurant Opportunities Center, Prof, which grew into a national movement of restaurant workers, employees, and consumers. She is the author of numerous books, including Behind the Kitchen Door, Forked, A New Standard for American Dining, and most recently, One Fair Wage, Ending Subminimum Pay in America. Welcome, Saru. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Our second panelist is Professor Annelise Orleck. She's a professor of history at Dartmouth and is the author of several books on community activism, living wage struggles, welfare rights, and immigration, including We Are All Fast Food Workers Now, The Global Uprising Against Poverty Wages. In 2018-2019, she testified before the Vermont and New Hampshire legislatures in favor of a $15 minimum wage. She has been involved in labor justice, immigrant rights, and LGBTQ rights struggles in Vermont and beyond, and is a former member of the Rights and Democracy Institute board. Welcome, Annelise. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome. And lastly, we have an amazing elected official from New Hampshire, Maria Perez. Maria is a New Hampshire state representative from Milford, New Hampshire, and chairwoman of the New Hampshire Latino Legislative Caucus. Maria is a longtime political and community organizer, a leader of Rights and Democracy, and has been helping lead the One Fair Wage campaign in the Granite States. Welcome, Maria. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here tonight. My pleasure.
Yeah. So panel, we want tonight to be a conversation. We want it to be an opportunity for all three of you to interact, to share your knowledge and experience, and for us to talk about this important topic. We want to make sure that we get to do a deep dive on the federal minimum wage and the need for a livable wage for everyone in our country. As a way to just get this topic started, I'd love for each of you to start off with a little bit of the big picture and really reflect on this 11th anniversary of the $7.25 minimum wage. What are your overall thoughts about the minimum wage in America, $7.25, 11 years with no movement, and the current state of wages in the US? And let's start with Saru. Oh, and you're on mute, Saru.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. It's really such an important conversation. So it is actually longer than 11 years. So it's 11 years for the overall minimum wage not having gone up, but it's actually 30 years that the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and workers with disabilities has not gone up. The sub-minimum wage for tipped workers has been frozen at $2.13 an hour at the federal level for 30 years. And I just want people to understand what that means. So the overall minimum wage hasn't gone up in over a decade. That means that there are millions of workers who have gone from teenagers to full adults, and the wage is exactly the same. For the service workforce working on tips, there are actually, we know of and have in our membership two generations of women, mothers and daughters. If you think about 30 years, mothers and daughters who've all worked on this absurd and ridiculous $2 wage. And what we all know is that had minimum wage gone up with inflation, with American productivity, with average wage growth, we'd be way higher than we are now. Some estimates have us 50 to even in some cases, $10 higher than where we are now in terms of wages. It is abominable and outrageous that the wage has been stagnated for as long as it has. It is due entirely to the corporate powers that be having inordinate and undue influence over our democracy. And the perfect example is the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. That is a direct result of the money, power, and influence of a trade lobby called the National Restaurant Association. We call it the other NRA. Frankly, they've been lobbying since emancipation of slavery to keep this sub-minimum wage for tipped workers as low as possible. At emancipation, they demanded the right to hire Black people and not pay them anything and have them live entirely on tips, a mutation of tipping from being an extra bonus on top of a wage to becoming a wage itself. And they've maintained that same argument that they shouldn't have to pay their workers. No customer should pay their workers for them since emancipation till now. So yes, we're talking about 11 years technically and 30 years technically that these wages haven't gone up, but truly we're talking about absurd, ridiculous, and grotesque wage stagnation for 150 years since emancipation.
Wow. So 11 years is just tip of the iceberg.
That's right.
We're celebrating a false anniversary, not surprising. The history is so deep. Speaking of history, Professor Orleck, you deal a lot with history. What are your thoughts on this 11 years of no movement on the minimum wage and the 30 years of no movement on the tipped worker wage, the sub-minimum wage? Overall thoughts for us this evening. And you're muted as well, Anna.
Saru's framing this, thank you for that. It's so important. And, I think that, there's been a little movement. Wages have been stuck for most low wage workers for 40 years, not just in terms of the minimum wage, but also in terms of the willingness of employers to raise wages to keep up with productivity. And I think the allusion to slavery is something that those who have struggled for a living wage most intensively since around 2012 with Fight for 15 and with the work that Saru and Restaurant Opportunities have done, and also the Walmart workers, all who have across the country brought attention to these stuck low wages. And I think one thing that I wanted to get across, in addition to the important point about tipped wages, is that these low wages are, taxpayers are paying to subsidize huge corporations like Walmart and McDonald's and other chain employers who don't pay a living wage in the form of public assistance benefits, right? No one can live, as you pointed out, not only can no one rent an apartment in any county in the country on $7.25 an hour, or frankly, less than, I think, 20 is what was the last thing that I looked at. In Vermont, I know, living wage is calculated as 13 an hour, but it's only calculated with the assumption that two earners are going to be making that, and they can then afford to, to rent a 1-bedroom apartment. So Walmart, McDonald's, they encourage their workers to get on public assistance, on food stamps, on all kinds of subsidies. And so any Walmart that opens, any McDonald's that opens costs the taxpayers, right? So I think there's a lot of discussion of, well, if wages go up, then prices are going to go up and consumers are going to pay. And I think it's really important for us to understand that taxpayers are paying anyway. Right. We are subsidizing the mega corporations, McDonald's and Walmart. Walmart is the #1 private employer on earth. And McDonald's is the #2 private employer on earth. They can certainly afford to pay more. Now, all of those Fight for 15 activists who've been struggling, in the last decade or so are very clear that it relates to slavery, right? And that these low wages, and home healthcare workers talk about it too, right? That it does go back to slavery, the assumption that people of color, women of color in particular, Black women, especially, are supposed to be working for next to nothing. So, keeping that in mind is really important. When Fight for 15 was created, doubling the federal minimum wage seemed like a crazy idea. We all know that $15 is not enough to live on. So, this whole idea of, Fight for 15 workers who I've talked to said, they'd say we're asking for something too quickly. We've been waiting for 150 years, as Saru pointed out.
Definitely. Maria, from your vantage point as a state representative and a labor activist in New Hampshire, what are your thoughts about these stagnant wages and the continuing $7.25 minimum wage? And New Hampshire uses the federal minimum wage, correct?
Well, let me tell you what is happening in New Hampshire. So we fight so hard in the legislation to stop SB 137 to keep tip workers in New Hampshire at $3.27 an hour. Even the $15 minimum wage, it can get raised for the whole country. So that bill passed in New Hampshire. So it is difficult to see what they're doing to stop us from getting $15 an hour, even, in the federal level. It's so heartbreaking to see the amount of people in New Hampshire is suffering from not getting enough money. We see more mental health illness happening in New Hampshire because people, they so desperately they work in 2 to 3 jobs just to put food on the table, or just try to figure it out how they can gonna afford it to pay the rent the next month. Rent is incredibly high in New Hampshire. 1-bedroom apartment to 2-bedroom apartment goes to almost the same amount that I pay for the mortgage in my house. It's ridiculous. And people not getting it. They think that people are lazy, the mothers are lazy, they don't want to go back to work. That's not true. I can see, I can hear, I've been interviewing a lot of workers in New Hampshire. I've been talking to, I've been getting into a fight with a manager from Walmart, like a local Walmart, because I've been going to the store and there's no open cashier registered open. And I say, why? Why is not registered? Oh, we can't find people to work. And I spoke to one of the workers at Walmart, and she told me that she's been there for almost 17 years, and she's not even making $15 an hour. How fair is that? So the Walmart is saying that they're going to pay $15, $16 an hour, but that's not true. They're not paying that to the workers. They've been there forever. And what I'm seeing in New Hampshire that's happening a lot is too that the harassment for tip workers in New Hampshire is incredible. It's bad. Even myself as a state legislator, at the beginning of the year, I was looking for a job, and I went through a whole experience of sexual harassment by texting by someone that I give my information because he told me that he was going to, talk to the human resource management. I'm not going to mention the name, but it was a local store. And then that night, when he asked me for my phone number, at the middle of the night, he started texting me nude pictures of himself, and then pictures of him having tequila shots. And then the next day, he sent me a text, apologized, and then asking me if I was willing to work for him. How in the world someone like myself, who is like a survivor of the sexual assault and domestic violence, go through that, and then we're gonna be able to work for the person that is like already, I feel like I was abused by that person over the text. So it is hard. This is what, like, women, especially women of color, we're going through, and then people don't realize how hard it is. And as a legislator, it's a change, that I have to go through that myself as well.
That's really heartbreaking and disturbing. I know that, like most other issues, everything is kind of connected, and the sub minimum wage is really connected to things like sexual harassment and violence. Saru, I know you have a longer history with the Restaurant Opportunity Center and other places. Do you want to talk about that link between the sexual harassment and violence and the tip wage?
Yeah, and I also think it's so important to talk about how much worse it got with the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, the restaurant industry was the second largest and absolute fastest growing private sector employer in the United States, but it has for generations been the absolute lowest paying employer in the US. Every year, prior to the Trump administration, the US Department of Labor would put out a list of the 10 lowest paying jobs every year. And every year, 7 of the 10 lowest paying jobs in America would always be in the restaurant industry. And 4 of those 7 lowest paid occupations in the US would always be tipped occupations. So I think sometimes when you talk about tipped occupations, some people in their minds think, oh, these are, I don't know, they think of white guys working in fancy fine dining restaurants earning a lot of money, when in fact, over 70% of tipped workers in the US are women, and they're mostly women working in very casual restaurants, mom and pop diners, Olive Gardens, Applebee's, IHOP, struggling with 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the US workforce and using food stamps at double the rate. And yes, struggling with the absolute highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry because they have to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior to feed their families and tips. We recently did a series of studies with Professor Catherine McKinnon, who's the renowned legal scholar who actually coined the term sexual harassment. And she has said 2 things. One, she has said, beyond a doubt, she said, when she's done research with us, randomized, very academically sound research, she says there is just the sexual harassment rates in the restaurant industry, in particular among tipped workers, dwarfs all other industries, she said, including the military, in terms of the level of sexual harassment that women face. And she said a second thing, which is that she has never seen a policy in any industry as effective at cutting sexual harassment as paying these women a full minimum wage with tips on top, because we did research looking at the 7 states that got rid of this sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. Look, New Hampshire and Vermont are 2 of 43 states in the US that persist with this legacy of slavery, with a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. But there are 7 states that got rid of this system many decades ago: California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska. All require full minimum wage with tips on top. And they have had higher restaurant industry sales, higher job growth rates, higher rates of tipping, higher overall small business growth rates, and 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment as New Hampshire and the states with a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. Why? Because when you pay a woman a full minimum wage, she doesn't have to put up with this much from customers. She doesn't rely entirely on the customer to feed her kids. She doesn't need to be put up with being touched or groped to get a tip because that's her only source of income. No, she can count on a wage from her boss, like every other worker in every other industry. And so Professor McKinnon said there's no policy we've seen that would cut harassment in half. There's no policy as effective at cutting sexual harassment, including, she said, including naming sexual harassment as illegal, which has been her life's work. That's not as effective as just giving these women the power to say, no, I don't need your tip. I get a wage. And yes, I'd like your tip, but I'm not going to put up with this to get your tip. Now, all of that got so much worse during the pandemic. The power dynamic between women servers and male customers got grotesque because with the pandemic, about 6 million restaurant workers lost their jobs. 63% said they had severe challenges accessing unemployment insurance because in most states, like New Hampshire and Vermont, they were told their sub-minimum wages were too low to qualify for benefits. So the hilarious irony of these right-wingers saying these folks are staying home collecting unemployment insurance is that the vast majority of workers we talked to said we couldn't even get it. We couldn't even get it from our state because we were told that our wages were too low. So millions of them were forced to go back to work last summer before they felt safe. CDC and UCSF named restaurants the most dangerous place to work in the United States, above hospitals. And workers said, I'm scared, but I have no choice. I didn't get unemployment insurance. They went back to work, found tips had gone down 50 to 75%, and customer hostility and health risks, and especially sexual harassment, went way up. 50% of women said sexual harassment went way up, with thousands of women telling us they were repeatedly asked, take off your mask so I can see how cute you are before I decide how much to tip you. Take off your mask so I can see the pretty face of my server before I decide how much to tip. We heard that so frequently and so repeatedly that we ended up coining a term for it. We call it masculine harassment. It has become a phenomenon in the industry during COVID of basically asking women to expose themselves and their families to the pandemic for the opportunity, not the guarantee, the opportunity to maybe get a tip from a male customer who likes the way they look. It is outrageous, and it has changed this issue from being an issue of injustice, gender, racial, a legacy of slavery, economic injustice, to becoming a matter of life or death. And so are we surprised that millions of workers left this industry and are saying they won't come back without a full livable wage with tips on top? Our most recent research is that of 3,000 workers we surveyed, 53% of those who are still in the industry, and millions have left, 53% of those who are in the industry currently say they're leaving. And 80% say the only thing that will make them stay is a $15 wage with tips on top. So we are seeing a moment of incredible disruption, a moment of lots of worker leverage, a moment in which small business restaurants are actually raising wages because they have to get workers to come back. And small business restaurants are saying, we can't do it alone. We need policy. We need the federal government and states to step up and make this a level playing field, raise wages across the board, because this workforce will not come back. And we will not be able to reopen the service sector or the restaurant industry unless we raise the wage.
Wow. I mean, lots of powerful stuff there. Just to pull out some things that you said, and there's so many amazing facts. And like obviously the One Fair Wage campaign, and you guys are doing your homework and really figuring out the facts. 63% of restaurant workers couldn't access the unemployment benefits. 53% are ready to leave. State Rep Perez, in New Hampshire, you're doing this work on the ground. What are you seeing in New Hampshire? Are you seeing these folks that are having a hard time with unemployment? Are you seeing the folks that are having even a harder time in their restaurants and in their jobs with the COVID and sexual harassment and all those different things?
Yeah, and then to be honest, I just don't want to make this about me. But to be honest, I'm like perfect example of how broken is that unemployment system in New Hampshire. To be honest, I've been working all my life, and I asked for unemployment because I have a medical condition, and I wasn't gonna be able to put myself in a situation that I was gonna be in public, anything like that. And I asked the unemployment many times that I'm okay to apply for my unemployment, my weekly unemployment. They say yes. And I continually call on the unemployment, and all of a sudden I got a letter and I got an email saying that I need to pay back $2,100 overpayment. When I know that all my life I've been working so hard, 110 hours a week, 2 to 3 jobs, just to make sure I don't ask for any help, any assistance. And now I went to court because they want $2,100 back. When I know that I'm allowed to have an employment, and this is the experience that I see happening to others. They don't qualify for unemployment, or they get them the paycheck, like the unemployment assistant, once a week, and all of a sudden they say, oh, we overpay you. I'm sorry, we made a mistake. You have to pay back. How in the world mother's gonna be able to do that when they have to pay $400 for each child to go to daycare? They can't even afford it to pay daycare. How can we expect these mothers to go back to work making $3.27 an hour? And then a lot of people keep saying these mothers are making enough with tips. Some of these mothers that I've been interviewing, sometimes they go home with $30 in their pocket, and sometimes $30 is what they have to use for gas just to drive to work. So it is incredible, disappointed to hear the people in New Hampshire, and especially our senators. I was in a meeting with Senator Hassan and Shaheen early in the year, and then someone from the Restaurant Association, Senators Restaurant Association, it was on that meeting. I was so disappointed to see both of our senators giving more time to the people from the Restaurant Association to speak and say, thank you, Senator Hassan and Shaheen, for saying no to the $15, than what the time that it was like given to like real people like myself to be able to say, we struggling, we suffering, we need the $15, and $15 in New Hampshire is not enough. We need people to make at least $24, $25 to at least to have a like decent place to live and food on the table. But for us senators, they're not getting that. To be honest, I'm so disappointed because they continually keep saying that they don't want to see the restaurant getting hurt. But I've been interviewing restaurant owners, small restaurant owners in New Hampshire, and they say, if we want to survive, we need the workers. So we need to pay them $15 or minimum wage or like livable wages in New Hampshire.
Wow. Sounds like Senators Hassan and Shaheen are a little tone deaf and not listening to what's going on. And that's probably not surprising when you know our political system. Professor Orleck, I know that you wrote a book about global uprising against poverty wages, and I know you were testifying with a bunch of Vermonters and New Hampshire folks around the $15 minimum wage. I'm wondering if you want to give a little context to some of these campaigns that have come up and maybe historically, but also in the last couple of decades around the fight for against poverty wages.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, but I want to pick up on something that Representative Perez said, because I think this issue of childcare is a really crucial one. It is so expensive. It takes such a high percentage of the salaries of low-wage women workers, and the majority of low-wage workers in this country are women of color. And so I think, it remains to be seen what's going to happen with the reconciliation bill that the Democrats just voted on yesterday in the Senate. But this notion of universal pre-K for children up to ages of 3 and 4, I think would be a really crucial intervention. And so in the same way that you can't talk about lack of a living wage and the desperation of workers being sexually harassed. And by the way, I've talked to a number of male workers in the restaurant industry who also were sexually harassed around this tip issue. But in the same way that you can't talk about living wage without sexual harassment, you really can't talk about living wage without talking about some kind of common good, publicly funded childcare, healthy, safe, decent. So I'm really glad that Maria brought that up. And and the second thing is, when I testified at the Vermont legislature, and the endless refrain that I kept hearing was, it's going to harm small businesses. It's going to harm small businesses. We can't even go up to 12 something an hour. We're really, really worried about that. And in Vermont, we know that it is not small businesses that employ most of the employees in Vermont. It's large businesses, and it's particularly the state of Vermont, which is a key issue. But in terms of how this fits into the larger set of issues, I think one thing that's also close to home in Vermont is that among the global movements against poverty wages are farm workers, who also are paid a sub-minimum wage. The federal labor laws do not apply to farm workers. Often state labor laws don't. California just, as a result of the movement of a lot of farm workers, including some of the Central Coast and Mixteco organizers in Ventura County, finally passed a law, for example, to mandate a maximum hour workday for farm workers, right? So farm workers are left out of it. Again, during COVID, they were most exposed to illness, often living in bunkhouses, without proper sanitation, without proper ventilation. There was one bunkhouse in Ventura County, California, and same in Vermont, where you have migrant farm workers, where they interviewed and tested people in these bunkhouses. And in the one in California, out of 200 people who they tested in a bunkhouse, 176 tested positive, right? So the conditions that people are living under are incredibly dangerous. And so, not only living wage, but also to take into consideration all of these other things. So globally, farm workers have been campaigning for the same labor rights as other workers, in the same way that tipped workers have been. Obviously, the global employees of the mega employers like Walmart and McDonald's have been also fighting, direct action, closing down streets, striking for a living wage, against sexual harassment. The McDonald's women went out in 12 cities a couple of years ago to fight sexual harassment on the job, and the particularity of fast food architecture, where you really have no room to move around, right? It's very, very difficult to get out of the space between the counter and the grill if your manager wants to rub himself up against you. All of that has been part of the struggle. And I think that the final group that I've looked at is garment workers, and all of those groups, I want to say, contain a lot of undocumented people, right? And in terms of not being able to get access to safety protections, to unemployment insurance, being afraid to come forward with complaints about people who are making them, work extra hours that they're not paid for, all of which happens in Vermont and New Hampshire. People are afraid to come forward. And so that's the other issues that we need to focus on making sure that all workers, including undocumented workers, who are such a big part of in rural states like this, get those benefits. And I saw you wanted to say something, Rep. Perez, so I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It comes to like farmer workers. I just want to share, some of my experience, because as a legislator, I get to share some of the information about vaccination clinic, like mobile vaccination clinic. So I went around to some of the farms in my area and asked the farmer owners to see if we have immigrants who are here, with a visa working in the farms, if I can talk to them and they see if they, they're willing to be vaccinated. If some of the owners from these farms, they didn't even allow me to talk to the workers. They told me no, they don't want to get vaccinated. They don't believe in vaccination. That's wrong. They should let me talk to the workers. Let me get it from the person and say, no, I don't want to get vaccinated. I don't believe on that. I don't believe that the person is going to say, no, I don't want to save my life. Yes, they're here with a visa, but they're humans. They should have the same rights as all of us. And especially if the vaccination clinic is mobile, they're not even going to use any other time from the farm, because the vaccination clinic is willing to come to the farm and then vaccinated the workers. And I was told no. And then some of the other farms, they told me, oh no, we only family members and we don't believe in vaccines. They don't even allow me to get close to the workers. That's ridiculous. We need to protect the workers. We need to protect us, like you say, and especially immigrants, especially people who don't understand the rights and they don't know the rights. And then the other thing that I want to mention is what I'm seeing, and I've been in a lot of different Facebook page, because I want to see the reaction of the people in our communities around New Hampshire about tip workers. The ignorance of the people is incredible. They say, oh, you need to go back to school and get a real job. They keep saying that tip workers, they're ignorant, they don't have education. A lot of these tip workers, they're not tip workers because they want it. It's not their choice. But a lot of them, they work in the restaurant industry because it works, for the schedule, for the partners, or whatever reason. But they're not all uneducated people. Like my daughter, my daughter, she works in the restaurant industry. She's a nurse. She went to school to be a nurse, but she decided to go to the restaurant industry because she saw the struggles of immigrants or people who didn't speak English, and she wants to help other people to make sure they didn't get abused in the industry. But she got stuck in the same bubble like everyone else. People of color, people, even my daughter was born in here. She see the same thing over and over and over. Discrimination, against people of color, especially women. She's a manager, but she still get, the same discrimination as like everyone else.
I wonder, obviously the problem is huge, and we keep finding more and more and more intersection points, childcare, farm workers, immigration. There's so many layers to it. Saru, I know that, you've got 20 years of experience now, first at Restaurant Opportunity Center. That led to One Fair Wage. I don't know if you want to talk about the movement for One Fair Wage and how you got from Rock to this campaign and what's going on with it.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually this September, in a month, is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I don't know if it's incredible to me to think that because 9/11 is really the birth of our social movement organization, or set of organizations. On 9/11, there was a restaurant at the top of the World Trade Center, Tower 1, called Windows on the World. On that morning, about 73 workers died. They either jumped to their deaths or were literally evaporated inside the restaurant because the planes hit below them and the heat rose so quickly. And so I was asked as a very young organizer by the union that represented the workers inside that restaurant, which at that time was HERE. This is before the merger of Unite and HERE. And they said these workers are actually no longer, the survivors are no longer members of the union in some ways because there's no contract, there's no restaurant. And so we started a relief center for the survivors, 250 workers who had lost their jobs at the restaurant, families of the 73 victims, and the 13,000 restaurant workers who lost their jobs in New York City following the tragedy. It was a moment in some ways similar to this one. People had died, people were not eating out, restaurants were going under. And so we started in those ashes as a way to bring workers together in trauma. And out of those ashes became a fight to improve wages and working conditions in the industry. And we grew quickly only because there was no other place for most workers to go. The restaurant industry is less than 0.001% unionized in this country. So there's not a lot of other places to go. And so we grew really quickly. We became national. And in 2013, we launched the campaign for one fair wage after a decade and a half of hearing from workers over and over again all over the country that their top concern was their wages. And when you know this is the largest industry with the lowest paid workers, of course, they're going to say, what's your top concern? It's how little I'm being paid. And so we started that campaign in 2013. We actually, as many people may know, we won the issue on the ballot in Maine. We won the issue in DC. We won the issue in Michigan. And each time when we won, the Restaurant Association convinced legislators to overturn the will of the people. And the Restaurant Association, in some cases, convinced some workers that this was bad for them, saying tips would go away if wages went up, which we now know is absurd and ridiculous. The 7 states that have had a full minimum wage with tips on top actually have higher tipping averages than Vermont and New Hampshire. Alaska has the highest tipping average of any state in the US. Listen, when you pay people better, they tip better. That's what happens. They spend more in the industry and they tip better. And you don't have to take it from me. Denny's CFO was recently caught red-handed telling Congress we can't afford to pay 15, and in the same moment telling shareholders that their company was growing faster in California than any state in the US because of the $15 minimum wage, because they saw higher levels of customer spending and tipping and California than any other state in the US. So when you pay people more, they tip better. But the Restaurant Association got many legislatures to overturn the will of the people based on misinformation and lies and lots of money and lobbying. And so we've been through this really challenging fight. It's like I like to call it our Davida or Daniela versus Goliath, because it's not David versus Goliath. It's a lot of women, particularly women of color, leading this fight against this Goliath, this monstrosity of the National Restaurant Association, which has been named consistently always among the top 10 most powerful lobbying groups in Congress. But I've got to say, with all of that challenge and struggle, we are at an apex moment, because everything that we fought for over the last 20 years in some ways is coming to a head, with millions of workers leaving the industry saying we're just not going to put up with anymore, employers raising wages because they have no choice, and employers saying we need the wage to go up because we're having to raise wages. So everybody should have to raise wages. So the Raise the Wage Act, it's so important for everybody to know, is still moving through Congress. It did not die with the COVID package. It was introduced as part of the COVID package, but it did not die. It is still moving through Congress. It has a real shot of passing this year. But like Maria mentioned, there are 8 senators, Democrats, who need to change their vote in order for this to move. And 3 of them are in New England: Shaheen, Hassan, and King from Maine. Senator Sanders from Vermont is the champion of the bill. And we need New England to lead on this, to stop being the block, because the other senators who've opposed, many of them have said they will follow along if Shaheen and Hassan and King get out of the way. And so we need New England to step up and push your senators to not be the block for a raise for 27 million people in the United States. This bill would raise wages for 27 million people. It would end the legacy of slavery. That's the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. It would end the sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities, which is a grotesque reflection of our valuing of people with disabilities as somehow subhuman. It is time. It is overdue, as we've been talking about. So we need New Englanders to get your senators to do the right thing.
Wow. That's what you call a call to action, folks. That is what you call that. Representative Perez, you are on the ground in New Hampshire, One Fair Wage campaign. Who's involved in the One Fair Wage campaign in New Hampshire? How are those conversations going with Senator Shaheen? I know you said that they really respect the Restaurant Association, but what's going on in New Hampshire?
Well, it's my pleasure to report that two congressional representatives, Pappas and Annie Custer, publicly, openly say they're supporting raising the minimum wage, livable wages. That's what we need in New Hampshire, which is great to hear. And that's what we need. Now we need Pappas and Custer to push Senator Hassan and Shaheen to say yes, and then work for the people in New Hampshire, especially Hassan. We need Hassan to remember that she is due for re-election next year. And a lot of the people who voted for her last time, they counted on her to do the right thing, especially right now when people going through like really hard time in New Hampshire, and especially the restaurant workers, the service workers, they're having a hard time to keep up with like necessities, rent, food, medical bills. A lot of these workers, they don't even have medical insurance. I had an experience with an immigrant family from Nashua. The father was working in a restaurant in Nashua. He was given a ride to other co-workers. He got COVID and he passed away from COVID. The family reached out to the restaurant owner. The restaurant owner said, "You're on your own. I don't have nothing to do with your family. I don't want to know nothing about your family." This is the struggles that the families in New Hampshire are going through right now. And then that's a heartbreaking situation because this is what the immigrants, people of color, are going through in New Hampshire. And if Hassan and Shaheen don't see this, I don't know what else. I don't know what else to tell them to make them realize this is the reality of the people in New Hampshire. And to be honest, it's really hard when you try to have conversations. You call the office and you try to set up an appointment to talk to them. They don't have a time for you. But you see them going to barbecues with the lobbies. You see them, Hassan was with the Exxon at the barbecue event. When I asked to talk to any of them, they don't have time for us, but they do have time for the lobbies.
All right. Well, it sounds like we've got a lot of work to do on the congressional level to make this happen. And it's always good from a policy perspective to let your congressperson and your senator know what you want to see from them in policy. I do want to ask. We're in this kind of strange time with COVID, where it's become more and more important that folks communicate by social media. And a lot of people are getting their information in small bites, small memes, small clips. I think we might have queued up one of the many kind of cartoons or memes that go around. I don't know if one of our comms folks has that ready to go. If not, I can share it. But want to mostly talk about what it is like to try to talk to people and. Sorry, I'll just share my screen very quickly. There we go. So this is a labor shortage cartoon that's come around recently. You can see this, person that's paying $7.25 an hour is thinking the labor shortage is killing them, and the person who's paying $17 an hour which is still probably not a livable wage. It's got a lineup of people ready to work. Wondering, folks' thoughts about this kind of cartoon and the labor shortage stuff going on, but also how do we communicate with people? How do we break through? We're hearing about a lot of folks that are using the increased wages equals increased prices and a lot of like very snappy kind of taglines, but how do we in this time of of the social media, the internet, really get our messages through and use that to our advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that would be good to do, I want to hold up a friend of mine who's a farmer here in Thetford, Vermont, and who voluntarily raised his minimum wage to $15 an hour a couple of years ago, who has found that his customers are more loyal, his employees stay longer, he doesn't have to spend all this time and money having people leave and then interviewing new people, and overall the farm is a really positive environment. And I think some of what we need to do is get out the voices of those folks, because Hassan's answer and Phil Scott's answer in Vermont is always, well, small businesses. But there are small businesses who recognize what Saru just said, which is that when people are paid more, they spend more in small businesses, right? The whole economy is lifted. And and I think that's going to be as true in Vermont and New Hampshire as it is anywhere else.
Saru, social media and building a movement.
So one thing that we need to do messaging wise is stop calling it a labor shortage. It actually is not a labor shortage. There are millions of people that have worked in this industry. It's not a shortage of people. What we are calling it is a wage shortage. It is a wage shortage. If you don't want to use the term wage shortage, then at least call it a staffing crisis, but it's not a labor shortage. I read one really outstanding article, I believe it was in The Intercept or one of those, that said calling it a labor shortage is like saying there's a shortage of Mercedes-Benzes for $1,000. It is not a labor shortage. There are Mercedes-Benzes, they're just not available for $1,000. There are people, there's labor. They're just not willing to work anymore, and they won't work for $2.13 or $3.27 in New Hampshire, or even $6, which is what I believe it is in Vermont. It is unacceptable. And workers are saying, listen, it costs me more in transportation and childcare to get to work than I get in wages and tips when I get there, not to mention the health risks and hostility and harassment I have to put up when I get there. It is not adding up anymore. And so what I love about the image you just shared is that we are hearing from small businesses basically two things. Some are saying, I voluntarily raised my wages and I don't have a labor shortage, but because I raised my wages, but as I've said, I need it to be a level playing field. I do need to raise prices moderately. We have actually just put out a how-to guide for small business restaurants where we've actually provided a calculator and numbers based on UC Berkeley calculations of price elasticity of how much price increase is required to go from a $2 wage to a $15 wage for restaurant workers. It's about an 18% price increase that's required over the period of time of the increase. Look, the Raise the Wage Act calls for an increase from 2 to 15 over many years. It may end up getting extended to up to 8, maybe even more years. So you're talking about 18% increase over 8 years. That means your burger maybe is 10 now and 11.80 8 years from now. And so that is a price increase most customers are already frankly paying due to other issues, rent increases, food price increases. So we know that customers are willing to pay more. We know that small businesses are willing to raise wages right now to get workers, but they're saying in order to accommodate even moderate price increases, we need the floor to be lifted because, as Professor Orleck said, everybody needs that floor to go out and spend and to support small businesses. So that's one thing they're saying. But the second thing they're saying, which that image you put up, it really speaks to this. They're saying, listen, we're raising wages on our own, but that's actually not enough. Some people are raising wages and still not able to get workers. And it's not because workers are staying home collecting unemployment insurance. It's because so many workers changed their lives last year when they found it was no longer worth it to work in the restaurant industry and went and did something else. They're working, some of them are working in gig jobs, which is not great either. Some of them went back to schools. I've heard people working in call centers, all kinds of different occupations. And for them to turn their lives all the way back around and come back, they're going to have to trust that this is permanent change. And it's very hard to trust that. Look, Olive Garden, parent company Darden, and Applebee's both put out messages that they're raising wages. Applebee's said, we're now paying 15. Olive Garden said, we're now paying 10. The workers showed up and they said, oh, we meant 15 with tips. Oh, we meant 10 with tips. And so it just created massive distrust that you're talking about what, a signing bonus, temporary signing bonus, or you're talking about getting it with tips. Workers are not dumb. You can pay $1,000 plus an iPad. You can pay $2,000. That will get me through what? 1 month of rent, 2 months of rent? And then where am I? I've changed my life back around to come back to the industry and I'm stuck again in the same place. And so workers need to see permanent change. And the only folks that have the platform to communicate to millions of workers that there will be permanent change that you can trust in is lawmakers. Only policymakers, state and federal policymakers are the only ones who can signal to workers, this is real, this is permanent, come back, it's worth working in restaurants once again.
I think policymakers and lawmakers are really essential for another industry that is chronically underpaid and that is predominantly women of color, and that is childcare and elder care, home care, and the only way we're going to get that is federal subsidies and state subsidies, and we have to understand that that's part of the common good. And so, along with farm workers, along with restaurant workers, along with garment workers, care workers are chronically underpaid. And, hell, I think most workers feel that way. We'll pay taxes. I would much rather pay taxes, to subsidize, people who take care of children and elders than, for whatever the next bomber or, junket for corporate lobbyists. So I think that's a message that also needs to get out there. And I think we need to be talking about what's in that $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, because it's the first federal bill in a really long time to address both elder care and child care. And, got to get out there and talk about it and support it.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to close with is we need to get their restaurant owners accountable for what is happening with the workers. I just saw an article from Maine that it was a restaurant worker this person was harassed by a white supremacy group. And this person, because she was harassed by this white supremacy group, she got fired because she didn't want to help these people because she was harassed by this group. We need to make sure that owners, they're accountable for this kind of behavior. They need to make sure that their employees are safe and they don't have to work in these hostile environment. And that's my message, restaurant owners, please, they have to make sure that the people are safe, make sure that the environment is welcoming and people not, getting harassed and then putting their life in danger.
And to loop it back to where we started, Saru talked about how the number one way workers can feel empowered and feel okay with pushing back on sexual harassment and being able to be safe in the work is to have that higher wage, and to be able to have that higher wage plus tips is really the way. We've had some great conversation this evening and a lot of great topics. I do want to give just 1 or 2 minutes in case there's any topics we missed, conversation you want to throw in, or any announcements that any of the panel might have that they want to include this evening.
Well, I'm always the perennial optimist. So I do want to say that I noticed a story in a stat the other day that as a result of workers not rushing back into the restaurant and grocery industries and on the front lines and during COVID, the minimum wage, the average wage for something like 80% of those employees is now passing $15 an hour. In terms of Fight for 15, from 2012 to 2016, workers managed to get themselves 12 times the amount in wage raises that Congress awarded all those years ago when they raised the wage to $7.25 an hour. And under COVID, organizing, attempts to unionize, unwillingness to put up with the kinds of treatment that Professor Jayaraman and Rep. Perez have talked about, has made a real difference. And so, yeah, let's keep paying attention also and support these workers who are getting out there to stand for a better life.
Thank you, Annelise. All right, well, thank you so much, Annelise, Maria, and Saru, for joining us this evening. And thank you to everyone who's out there watching our latest episode of The Traverse. You can follow us on social media by searching Rights and Democracy Institute on Facebook or at Rights and Democracy Institute on Instagram, and also find out more information about the Rights and Democracy Institute at our website, www.rights-democracy.org. I'm Dan Fingus, and I hope you join us again next month for the next episode of The Traverse as we continue to explore the ideas and issues that make our movement, and we once again talk with people who are putting them into action. Have a wonderful night, everyone.